The noise in the bar was deafening. Laughter, music, and clinking bottles mixed together in a chaotic symphony. But in the middle of it all, there was one man who didn't belong. Sergeant Malik Johnson, a black soldier back home on leave, sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a drink. His uniform, still fresh and crisp, set him apart from the rowdy crowd of bikers who were already well into their night. The place had the usual dive bar atmosphere, worn-out stools, dim lights hanging above the wooden bar, and walls covered with old, yellowed photos. In the corner, a jukebox played a slow country tune that barely registered above the chatter. It was a typical night in the town, a place Malik didn't know well, but he wasn't here for sightseeing. He was here to unwind after months in the field. A break from the battles, the noise, the pressure of being a soldier. Malik was used to being an outsider. In his line of work, that was nothing new. He had spent years in foreign lands, surrounded by people who didn't look like him, didn't speak like him. But it was different back home. The stares were more subtle here, but they were still there. The looks. The whispers. Tonight, though, he didn't mind. His flight home had been long, and he needed a drink. His body was still adjusting to the quiet of civilian life. The weight of his uniform felt strangely heavy after being away for so long. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his glass, lost in thought. The small town he had landed in didn't seem like much, but it was a peaceful place. He had told himself that he'd spend his leave just like this, quiet, simple, with nothing but his own company. But the tension in the room was palpable. There was something in the air tonight. Something off. He could feel the eyes on him. It was subtle at first, just a few glances here and there. But as the minutes ticked by, the stares grew bolder. The loud laughter of the bikers at the bar fell silent as they took in his presence, sizing him up. Malik kept his gaze forward, letting them think whatever they wanted. He'd learned long ago not to engage with people who only saw the surface. A loud voice broke his moment of solitude. "What's a soldier like you doing in a place like this? You lost or something?" Malik didn't need to turn to see who it was. He already knew. The voice was rough, like it had spent too many years shouting over the roar of engines and the noise of the road. He had heard it before in various forms, the kind of voice that demanded attention. The biker stood in front of him, blocking his view. He was tall, with tattoos covering both arms, the kind of tattoos that told a story of rebellion, freedom, and a life lived on the edge. His eyes were a shade of blue that seemed out of place against his sunburned skin, but they were hard, cold, a challenge in themselves. Malik didn't flinch. He had dealt with tough guys like this before, but something about this man's presence sent a ripple through him. Something was different tonight. The air was thick, as if the room itself were holding its breath. "No, I'm not lost," Malik said quietly, keeping his voice calm. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't about to back down either. "I'm just here for a drink. Nothing more." The biker chuckled, taking a step closer. He was looking for a fight, Malik could sense it. He had seen men like him before, full of bravado, ready to pick a fight with anyone who looked like they were different. "You're real calm, huh? Just sitting there, acting like you own the place." The biker's tone was condescending, almost mocking. "I don't own this place. Just visiting," Malik replied, never breaking eye contact. The man's smile was tight. "Well, you don't belong here. You're not one of us." Malik's grip on his drink tightened, but he kept his composure. "I don't need to be one of you to have a drink." A few seconds of silence passed before the biker's smile faded. The tension in the room had escalated, and Malik could feel it crawling up his spine. People were watching now, waiting for something to happen. The biker wasn't done yet. With a sudden movement, he reached forward, grabbed Malik's drink, and threw it across the bar. The glass shattered on the floor, the liquid splashing across the dirty wooden surface. The bar went dead quiet. Malik stood up slowly. The crowd was still frozen in shock. His heart rate didn't speed up. There was no adrenaline rush. He had seen worse. He had survived worse. This was nothing compared to the situations he'd faced on the front lines. Still, this was different. This was personal. The biker looked at him with a smirk, clearly expecting Malik to react, to get angry, to shout, or worse, to fight back. The others at the bar seemed to be waiting for the explosion, the inevitable clash. They weren't sure what would happen, but they were sure it would be something dramatic. But instead of throwing a punch, Malik simply looked at the biker, his face unreadable. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone in this bar. He had fought battles where survival depended on keeping his emotions in check. And tonight, that's exactly what he did. His eyes locked on the biker's, steady and unyielding. "I'm not going to fight you," Malik said quietly. "But I am leaving." The biker's expression shifted. The smirk faltered. For a brief moment, the man seemed confused. He had expected a confrontation, a dramatic scene, maybe even a fight. But instead, Malik stood there, taller than the man by several inches, with an air of calm that unsettled him. Without another word, Malik grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. The crowd remained still, watching him like he was some sort of alien. He walked past the biker, leaving him standing there, stunned. The others didn't move, either. No one dared say a word. As he pushed through the door, stepping out into the cool night air, Malik's chest tightened for just a moment. It wasn't fear, he wasn't afraid of this man or this town. But something had shifted. He could feel the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't about the drink or the insult. It was about control. About knowing when to engage, when to fight, and when to walk away. Back inside, the bikers were still frozen in place. No one said anything. Not yet. But the incident was already buzzing through the bar. Word was spreading fast. There was something about the way Malik had handled the situation that didn't sit right with the crowd. It was too calm. Too controlled. And as Malik walked down the empty street toward his hotel, he knew the ripples of that night wouldn't be easy to ignore. The questions were already starting to form. Who was this man? What kind of person could stay so calm under pressure? But that wasn't all. There was more to Malik Johnson than the soldiers, bikers, or the quiet bargoers realized. And what happened that night was only the beginning. The silence outside the bar was deafening. Malik's boots echoed down the empty street as he walked, the only sound in the cool night air. His mind was still replaying the scene in the bar, the bikers' taunts, and his own calculated response. It was a strange mix of calm and adrenaline that kept him steady as he walked. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Something about that moment, about how the biker had tried to provoke him, how he had stayed cool, walked away, felt too important to ignore. It was like a trigger had been pulled, and now, there was no going back. The streets were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The small town was a world away from the chaos of his military life, yet somehow, it felt just as tense. The fact that he had chosen this place, this isolated, quiet town to spend his leave, wasn't random. It wasn't just about needing a break from the war, from the gunfire, the screams, and the endless tension of soldiering. There was something about this town, something about the people in it, that tugged at him. As he neared the small hotel where he was staying, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He slowed his pace, instinct kicking in. It wasn't uncommon for people to stare when he was in uniform, but this felt different. There was an edge to the stares he had received tonight. He quickened his steps, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't want to deal with whatever might be lurking around the corner. He had been in enough dangerous situations to know that fear was a tool. It was something to be used, not something that should control you. He had to stay in control. The hotel doors swung open as he entered, and he was greeted by the warm, musty air of the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with short brown hair, glanced up from her phone as Malik approached the desk. "Good evening, Sergeant, she said, her voice polite but distant. Evening, Malik replied, his voice calm. He didn't feel like engaging in small talk. The encounter at the bar had left him with a lot to think about. He took his key, nodded his thanks, and made his way up to his room. The door clicked shut behind him as he tossed his jacket on the bed. His uniform was still sharp, but the tension that clung to him was undeniable. He had learned to push emotions down, to bury them beneath layers of armor. But tonight, something felt different. He couldn't help but replay the incident in his mind over and over again. The biker's face, the mocking tone of his voice, the way he had thrown the drink. Everything had happened so fast, but it was clear now that there was something bigger at play here. It wasn't just about one disrespectful biker. It was about the town, the people in it, and something far more dangerous that was lurking beneath the surface. Malik sat down on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. The people in that bar hadn't seen what he had seen. They hadn't felt the weight of the situation like he had. He had learned to read people quickly in the military, to spot the signs of danger even before they happened. And tonight, he had sensed something brewing. But what was it? He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the silence in the room grew thicker. What were the bikers really after? Was it just the typical small-town bigotry? Or was there something else behind their actions? There were no answers. Just questions. And that bothered Malik more than anything. The next day. Malik didn't sleep well that night. The events at the bar had left him restless, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. It wasn't just about the confrontation. It was about the ripple effect that came with it. The way people responded. The way they watched him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something bigger. Something dangerous. The next morning, the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds when Malik decided to leave the hotel. The town was small enough that he could walk to wherever he needed to go. There wasn't much to do here, and he was used to that. After all, what did he really need? A place to rest, a drink, maybe some food. But as he walked through the main street, he noticed something strange. It wasn't the people staring at him as he passed by, he had grown used to that, but rather the atmosphere. The town, though quaint, had an eerie quiet to it. A sense that not everything was as it seemed. He passed a few stores, a diner, and a small convenience shop, but no one greeted him. No one smiled. The people were too busy, too preoccupied with whatever was happening behind the scenes. There was a heaviness in the air, like something was about to break. Malik entered the diner, hoping for a cup of coffee and a moment of peace. As soon as he walked in, he felt the eyes of the room on him. A few people turned away, avoiding his gaze. Others glanced at him before looking down at their food. The awkward tension was palpable. He made his way to an empty booth in the corner and sat down, trying to ignore the stares. The waitress, an older woman with graying hair, came over to take his order. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Yeah. Black, please." She nodded and walked away without saying another word. It didn't surprise Malik. He had gotten used to people not speaking much to him when he was in uniform. It was the subtle things, the way they looked at him, the way they avoided him, that bothered him more than anything. As he waited for his coffee, he scanned the room, his military instincts kicking in. He was no stranger to reading people, to spotting danger before it arrived. And today, his gut was telling him that something wasn't right. There was something about the way the people here acted, something that didn't sit well with him. The coffee arrived, and Malik took a sip, letting the bitter liquid settle in his stomach. He was about to leave when the door swung open, and two men stepped inside. One of them was the biker from the bar. The one who had provoked him. The one who had thrown his drink across the room. Malik's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it. Instead, he took another sip of his coffee, trying to act casual, trying to ignore the tension that suddenly filled the room. The biker glanced over at Malik, his eyes narrowing when he saw him sitting in the booth. He nudged his companion, and they both began walking toward Malik's table. Malik's grip tightened around his cup, but he didn't look up. He wasn't going to let this man intimidate him again. Well, the biker said, his voice carrying through the diner. Look who we have here. The soldier who thinks he's too good for us. Malik remained silent, his eyes still on his cup. He wasn't going to rise to the bait. You got something to say to me, soldier, the biker continued, stepping closer. Or are you just gonna sit there like a coward? Malik's fingers clenched around the cup. He could feel the heat of the coffee, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. But he didn't answer. He wasn't going to give this man the satisfaction. The biker leaned in, his face inches from Malik's. I don't know what kind of man you are, but I'm telling you right now, you don't belong here. You don't belong in this town. We don't want your kind around here. Malik stood up slowly, his eyes finally meeting the biker's. There was no fear in his gaze. Only calm. You don't know anything about me, Malik said, his voice low and controlled. But I'm not here for trouble. If you want to keep talking, go ahead. I'm listening. The biker looked taken aback for a moment, but his smirk quickly returned. Yeah, I bet you are. Malik didn't flinch. Instead, he walked toward the door, his movement steady. He wasn't about to let this man, or anyone else, push him into a fight. As he stepped outside, the tension in the diner followed him, lingering in the air. But he didn't care. He had learned long ago that the most important thing was to stay in control. What the biker didn't know was that Malik wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a man in uniform. He was someone who had survived worse than this. And if these people wanted a fight, they were about to get more than they bargained for. The air outside felt heavier than it had just hours before. As Malik walked through the town, his thoughts were tangled in the events of the past day, the altercation with the bikers, the icy stares he received at the diner, and the strange feeling of being watched. The quiet town had become a place of unease, a place where every step seemed to carry the weight of something hidden. Malik was no stranger to feeling out of place, but this felt different, dangerous. By the time he reached his hotel, dusk was starting to settle over the streets. He hesitated outside the door for a moment, his instincts telling him something was off. But what was it? He had spent enough time in war zones to know when something was wrong, but this? This felt more personal. It felt like there was something darker beneath the surface of this sleepy town. Something the people were afraid to confront. Malik entered the lobby, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. The receptionist was no longer at the desk, and the area was empty, save for a few dimly lit lamps. A small chill ran through him, but he shook it off. He wasn't going to let the isolation get to him. He made his way up to his room, and as he closed the door behind him, a sense of relief washed over him. The quiet of the room felt like a small sanctuary, a space where he could think, reflect, and prepare for whatever was coming next. He sat on the edge of the bed, letting out a slow breath. His thoughts raced, but it was the image of the biker's face that lingered in his mind the most. The anger in the man's eyes was clear, but it was more than just personal animosity. There was something else, something deeper. Malik had faced off against enemies much more dangerous than a few rough bikers, but this felt different. They were pushing him, and he didn't know why. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through with a knife. The next morning. The sun was barely up when Malik found himself standing in front of the hotel, staring out at the street. His instincts were on high alert. He had spent the morning replaying the events in his head, trying to make sense of it all. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many loose ends. And he hated feeling unprepared. As he walked down the street, he noticed the same faces from yesterday, people who avoided his gaze, people who whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. They were acting like he didn't belong here, like he was an intruder in their small world. But what really bothered him was the feeling that they knew something he didn't. He passed by the diner once again, but this time, something was different. The door was propped open, and a man stood outside, leaning against the building. He was tall, with a rugged face and tattoos that stretched down his arms. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in his stance that immediately caught Malik's attention. The man didn't look at Malik directly, but his eyes followed him as he walked past. Malik's instincts screamed at him to turn around, but he didn't. Instead, he kept walking, his boots steady against the pavement. He was done being cautious. If someone wanted to confront him, they were going to have to face him directly. Malik knew that his presence here, his calmness, his resolve, was irritating some people. And that was fine. What they didn't know was that he wasn't here to back down. As he continued on, he spotted a small park down the road, a quiet place where he could think. He turned toward it, hoping for some peace. The park was empty except for a few scattered benches and trees, the early morning mist still clinging to the ground. Malik sat on one of the benches, his eyes scanning the surroundings. It was peaceful, but there was something about the place that didn't sit right with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Then, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Malik didn't need to look up to know who it was. He could feel the presence of someone approaching, too confident, too deliberate. "Nice day for a walk, huh?" a voice said. It was the same biker from the bar. Malik didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone even. He was done with games. The biker stood in front of him, blocking the view of the park. "Just making sure you know who you're dealing with," he said with a sneer. "You don't belong here, soldier. This town's not for people like you." Malik's gaze finally met the biker's, calm and steady. "What's that supposed to mean?" The biker smirked. "You think just because you wore that uniform, people are going to respect you? Think again. You're out of your element here. This isn't some army base where everyone bows down. People like me don't take kindly to outsiders. Especially ones who think they can just walk in and take over." Malik stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm not here to take over anything," he said, his voice low. "I'm here to mind my business. But if you want to keep pushing me, you better be ready for the consequences." The biker's smirk faltered for a split second. He hadn't expected Malik to stand his ground. The tension in the air thickened, but the biker quickly recovered, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You're not from around here," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "We don't like strangers, especially ones who think they're better than us." Before Malik could respond, the biker's phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly before turning his attention back to Malik. "I'll be seeing you around, soldier. And when I do, we'll see who's really in control of this town." Without another word, the biker turned and walked away, his boots thudding against the pavement. Malik watched him go, but this time, he didn't feel the familiar surge of anger. Instead, he felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The biker had given him a warning. But that wasn't what Malik was worried about. What really bothered him was the implication that there was something more to this. Something that went beyond just a few bikers trying to intimidate him. It was as if they were protecting something, or someone, and Malik was caught in the middle of it. The unexpected visitor. That afternoon, Malik went to the local store to buy some supplies. The air was still thick with unease, and every interaction he had with the townsfolk felt like a game of chess. He was being watched, evaluated. People were wary of him. But no one spoke up. No one gave him any answers. As he entered the store, he noticed the same man from the park, tall, rugged, and with an air of authority, sitting in the back corner of the store, leaning against a shelf. His eyes locked onto Malik's the moment he stepped inside. Malik didn't react at first. He grabbed a few items, trying to act like he wasn't bothered. But the man didn't break eye contact. Finally, after a few tense moments, Malik walked over to the counter to pay for his items. "New in town, huh?" the man said casually as Malik approached. Malik raised an eyebrow. "What's it to you?" The man shrugged. "Just making conversation. Not many outsiders come through here. Something tells me you're not just passing through." Malik studied the man's face, trying to gauge his intentions. There was something about him that made Malik uneasy, but not in the usual way. This wasn't a guy trying to pick a fight. This was someone who knew more than they were letting on. "Why are you watching me?" Malik asked bluntly, his voice steady. The man didn't flinch. "I'm not watching you," he replied. "I'm trying to figure out why you're here. This town's got a way of keeping secrets. And I don't think you're ready to hear them." The days blurred together. Malik had tried to go about his usual routine, but something about this town wouldn't let him be. Every corner seemed to hide a new layer of intrigue, and the more he dug, the more questions piled up. The tension in the air had only thickened, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to finally break the silence. Malik wasn't about to let this place dictate his every move. He had spent enough time in foreign lands, facing down enemies who used fear as a weapon. But this town? It was different. Here, fear wasn't just a tool. It was a shield, a veil that hid something darker, something more dangerous. The conversation with the man in the store still echoed in Malik's mind. There was something about him that felt familiar, though Malik couldn't put his finger on it. He wasn't just some random guy looking for answers. No, there was a purpose behind his probing questions. And Malik could sense that the man had his own reasons for watching him so closely. The next morning. The early morning fog was still clinging to the streets, the thick mist swallowing up the town as if it were trying to conceal something. Malik walked down the main road, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. His mind was racing with fragments of conversations, moments from the past few days that had felt out of place. What was the connection between the bikers and the town? What did they know that he didn't? He had tried to shake it off, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that someone, or something, was pulling strings from behind the scenes. And it wasn't just the bikers. There were others. People who didn't want him here, people who saw his presence as a disruption to their carefully constructed world. As he passed the diner, the door swung open, and the same man from the park stepped outside. This time, he wasn't leaning casually against the building. He was standing upright, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the street like a hunter tracking his prey. Malik didn't stop. He kept walking, but he could feel the man's gaze following him, tracking his every move. His instincts told him to keep his distance, but something about this man drew him in. He needed answers, and this was the person who might hold the key. A new encounter. After a few hours of wandering the town, Malik found himself back at the small park where he'd first encountered the bikers. The park, usually a quiet refuge, felt eerily still today. The trees were shrouded in fog, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. He could hear nothing but the distant sound of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Malik sat on the same bench he had before, his mind lost in thought. What was he missing? What did the town's residents know that they weren't telling him? A shadow fell over him, and for a moment, Malik felt his heart skip a beat. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The tall man with tattoos was standing behind him, his presence undeniable. "You've got a lot of questions, don't you?" the man said, his voice low and measured. There was no hostility in his tone, but there was something unsettling about his calmness. Like he was already in control of the situation. Malik turned to face him. "I'm not here to play games," he replied. "I want answers." The man raised an eyebrow. "Answers? What makes you think you're ready for the truth?" "I've been through worse," Malik said, his voice steady. "I've seen things you wouldn't believe. But whatever's happening here, it's not right." The man took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing. You're right about that. It's not right. But you're not the first one to come here asking questions. And you won't be the last. Who are you? Malik asked, his patience wearing thin. What's going on in this town? The man looked around, as if making sure no one was watching before he spoke again. You really don't know, do you? Malik shook his head. No, I don't. But I'm starting to think that no one here is who they say they are. I'm not leaving until I find out what's going on. The man's gaze softened, just slightly. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Then you'll need to be careful. This town, it's not just a place. It's a web. A network. And you've stepped into the middle of it. Malik leaned in, eager to hear more. What do you mean? The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed. There's something here, something the town's been hiding for years. And it's not just about the bikers. They're part of it, but they're not the whole picture. There are people here who are much more powerful. And they'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets. Malik's mind raced. The words were cryptic, but they confirmed what he had suspected. There was something far more sinister at play. And the bikers? They were just the tip of the iceberg. Later that afternoon, Malik found himself once again at the diner. He hadn't planned on coming back, but something inside him told him he needed to. There were pieces of the puzzle still missing, and he couldn't afford to overlook any detail, no matter how small. He walked in and immediately felt the eyes of the patrons on him. The same cold, distant stares. No one said a word as he took a seat at the counter, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of recognition. The waitress from the other day approached, her face a mask of indifference. What can I get for you? She asked flatly. Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. You've been here a while, right? She nodded. Long enough. Malik studied her for a moment, trying to read her. What's going on in this town? He asked quietly. Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something, fear, in her eyes. She leaned in, close enough for Malik to hear her whisper, You don't want to know. Trust me. Some things are better left alone. Before he could respond, the door opened, and a man stepped in. Malik didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way the man walked that made his skin prickle. The man scanned the room quickly, his eyes locking onto Malik's for a brief second before he headed straight for the back of the diner. Something about the man's presence unsettled Malik. He didn't know why, but it felt like a warning. Like the man had been looking for him. A warning in plain sight. Malik stood up abruptly, his heart pounding. He needed to get out of there before things escalated. As he stepped out of the diner, he saw the same man walking toward him, his pace quickening. The man reached Malik before he could make it to the street. You should leave, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't a place for people like you. Malik didn't flinch. I'm not leaving until I get answers. The man smirked, but there was no humor in his expression. That's what they all say. But you don't get to walk away from this town without paying the price. Malik stood his ground, not backing down. I'm not afraid of you. And I'm not afraid of your friends. The man's face hardened. You will be. You don't know what you're dealing with. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. Malik stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of the warning. It was clear now, this town wasn't just hiding something. It was hiding everything. The days continued to slip by in a blur. Malik had spent hours pacing the same streets, always one step ahead of those who seemed to be watching him, but never enough to uncover what lay hidden beneath the surface of the small town. The unsettling sense of being followed had never faded. If anything, it had grown more pronounced. There were eyes everywhere. From the parked cars along the road to the shadows behind every corner, it felt like the town itself was watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. But Malik had made up his mind. He wasn't leaving without uncovering the truth. Malik's resolve only strengthened after the cryptic encounter at the diner. That man's words had haunted him, gnawing at his thoughts. You don't know what you're dealing with. What did that even mean? The man had tried to warn him, but Malik wasn't in the habit of running from challenges, especially not when it came to discovering the truth. If anything, it made him more determined to push further into the heart of this mystery. The message. A few days after the warning, Malik found himself wandering to the outskirts of town. The streets here were quieter, the buildings fewer. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of a large, dilapidated warehouse, its windows long since shattered, its paint peeling away from years of neglect. It was a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, left to rot in the corner of a town that had its own dark history. As Malik approached, his gut twisted. He wasn't sure why, but something about this place felt like it had been calling to him. As if the secrets he was searching for were buried here, beneath the rusted metal and the broken glass. He pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The air smelled of mildew and decay, the faint sound of dripping water echoing through the cavernous space. There was something in the air, a palpable sense of tension, that told Malik he wasn't alone. He wasn't sure what it was, but he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. As he walked deeper into the warehouse, his foot struck something hard. He bent down, his fingers brushing against a small piece of paper. When he unfolded it, the words were simple, but they sent a chill down his spine. You were warned. This is your last chance. The paper fluttered in his hand as the reality of the situation hit him. Whoever had left this message knew exactly what he was doing. They were watching him, tracking his every move. And now, they were giving him an ultimatum. Malik's fingers tightened around the paper. He wasn't going to back down. This was the moment. He was too deep in now to turn back. The man behind the curtain. After the encounter in the warehouse, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of this town were closing in on him. The man who had warned him at the diner was a figure in the shadows, but he had to know something. If Malik was going to get to the truth, he needed to confront him. No more games. No more vague warnings. That night, Malik went back to the park, the same spot where he'd first encountered the bikers and the man who had spoken to him in riddles. He knew he wasn't going to find answers by hiding in the shadows. If he was going to get out of this, he needed to face the ones who were pulling the strings. It was late when Malik arrived, the moon casting an eerie glow over the park. He sat down on the same bench where everything had started, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. His hand clenched into a fist as he thought of the message in the warehouse. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let him go without a fight. But he was ready for it. Just then, a shadow moved in the distance. It was him, the tall man with tattoos who had spoken to Malik before. The same one who had warned him. Malik stood up as he approached, a sense of urgency in his step. Are you following me now? Malik asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't respond at first. He stopped in front of Malik and looked him up and down, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You should have left when you had the chance. But you didn't, did you? Malik stared at him, his heart pounding. What's going on? Who are you? The man's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But you're right to keep pushing. You're closer to the truth than you think. Then tell me. What is the truth? The man's eyes flickered around, checking their surroundings. Then, with a sigh, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. This town is a front. It's not just a quiet, forgotten place. There's a reason why people like the bikers are here. They're not the real threat. The truth is far worse than you can imagine. Malik took a step forward. What do you mean? Who is behind all of this? The man hesitated. There's a group. A shadow group. They've been controlling this town for years. The bikers? They're just pawns in a much larger game. The people who really run this place, they've been keeping things hidden for a reason. A very dangerous reason. Malik felt a pit form in his stomach. Who are they? The man looked around once more, making sure no one else was close enough to hear. They're not just people. They're a network. They have connections everywhere. They've infiltrated the local government, the businesses, the families. They've made sure that nothing, ever gets out. And if you keep digging, they'll make sure you don't get out either. Malik's pulse quickened. The gravity of what the man was saying hit him all at once. The town wasn't just hiding a few secrets. It was hiding an entire system, an underground network that controlled everything from the shadows. The bikers, the people at the diner, the threats, it was all part of something much bigger. And you're part of it? Malik asked, his voice low. The man's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I was. I'm not anymore. But I know enough to get you out of here alive. And that's the only reason I'm telling you this. You need to stop looking into this. It's bigger than you. Malik didn't flinch. I'm not running. The man stepped back, a resigned look on his face. You should. But if you're too stubborn to listen, then at least take this. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered key. This is the key to the storage unit on the edge of town. It's where the answers are. But I'm telling you now, you're not ready for what you'll find. Before Malik could speak, the man turned and walked into the shadows, disappearing into the night. The storage unit. The next morning, Malik made his way to the storage unit. It was on the outskirts of town, far from where most people lived or worked. The building was old, surrounded by an overgrown fence and forgotten by everyone except those who had a reason to be there. As he approached the door, his heart began to race. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he knew it was the key to everything. His fingers trembled slightly as he inserted the key into the lock, turning it with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. Malik stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He could barely make out the outlines of old boxes, crates, and files scattered across the floor. It was clear this place hadn't been touched in years. He made his way to the back of the room, where a stack of files sat atop a rusted filing cabinet. With trembling hands, Malik pulled out the top file and opened it. What he found inside shocked him to his core. The file was filled with records, names, dates, addresses, and photographs. But they weren't just any records. They were documents detailing the lives of everyone in the town. And at the center of it all was a list of names. High-ranking officials, local business owners, and, most chilling of all, the names of the people who had been pulling the strings all along. The last page of the file was the most shocking of all. It contained a photograph of the man Malik had been chasing, a man who was listed as one of the key players in this underground network. The air outside was cold as Malik stepped out of the storage unit. The early morning light had begun to break through the clouds, casting a grayish glow over the abandoned industrial complex. His mind raced. The files he had uncovered were proof of something far greater than just the small-town mystery he had initially walked into. The people he had seen lurking in the shadows, the cryptic warnings, and the threats, they all pointed to one thing. There was a vast, shadowy network at play here. It wasn't just a group of bikers or some local criminals. It was a deep, entrenched system with its fingers in every part of the town's life. Malik walked through the cold, feeling the weight of the file in his hand. The names and addresses listed in the file were far too detailed to be random. There were connections between the people on the list that went back decades. Some of these names were well-known figures in the town, business owners, local politicians, law enforcement officers, even the mayor. What could they possibly have to do with this? And then there was the man, the one who had been watching him all along. The one who had left him the cryptic warnings. He had to know more. The file was a lead, but it was just a piece of the puzzle. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the final answers lay with the man who had tried to stop him, the one who had turned away from the shadows but couldn't fully escape them. The man in the shadows. Malik didn't waste any time. He had one goal now: confront the man who had been both a warning and a guide. He needed to understand the connections, to know why the man had left him the file, and why he was so eager to steer Malik away from the truth. He returned to the park where it all began, the same park where he'd first seen the man. His mind was steady, but his heart was heavy with uncertainty. He had no idea how he would find the man, but something told him he would be here, waiting, just as he had been the first time. Malik sat on the same bench where he had faced the biker group. The park was eerily quiet, the sound of rustling leaves the only noise around him. Minutes passed, and then he saw him, the tall, tattooed figure emerging from the shadows. The man moved with purpose, his gait slow but confident. As soon as he saw Malik, his eyes narrowed, and he stopped in his tracks. "You came," the man said simply, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had anticipated this moment. "I told you to leave." Malik stood, meeting the man's gaze with a determination that was almost palpable. "I'm not leaving until I understand everything. I have the file. I know what you've been trying to hide." The man didn't react, but Malik could see the tension in his shoulders. He was on edge, more than he had been before. "Do you?" the man replied. His voice was a low growl, but there was no malice in it, just resignation. "You have pieces of the puzzle, but you don't understand what it means yet. You're playing a game that's much bigger than you." "I don't care about the game," Malik shot back. "I care about the truth. Why did you leave me the file? Who are you really?" The man hesitated for a long moment. He looked around, as if ensuring they weren't being watched. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper. "What you've uncovered is just the surface. The group, the ones controlling this town, pulling the strings, they've been operating in the shadows for decades. And they've gotten good at it. They're not just after power, they're after something far more dangerous." Malik's curiosity deepened. "What are they after? What could be so dangerous?" The man exhaled slowly, his eyes momentarily distant. "I didn't always know. I thought I was part of something important, something that would change everything. But I was wrong. I got in too deep, and now I can't leave. None of us can. They control everything, the people, the businesses, the law enforcement. And it's not just here. It's spread across the state. Across the country, maybe." Malik's mind whirred. "But why leave me the file? Why give me a chance to expose them?" The man looked at Malik for a long time. "Because you're different. You're not afraid to dig. I could see it in you the first time we met. But I also know what happens when you push too hard. They will find you, Malik. They always find those who get too close." Malik clenched his fists. "I'm not running. You didn't leave me that file just to let me walk away. You want me to finish this." The man nodded slowly. "Yes. But know this, what you uncover will change everything. You won't just be exposing a group of corrupt individuals. You'll be tearing apart an entire system, one that has been built over decades. And they will stop at nothing to protect themselves. A dangerous revelation." The man stepped closer to Malik, his face solemn. "Do you know who the man at the top is?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Malik felt a cold chill run through him. He shook his head. "No. But I think I'm about to find out." The man's eyes darkened. "You've seen his name on the list. He's the one pulling the strings, the puppet master. The one who orchestrates everything from the shadows. His name is Thomas Hale." The name hit Malik like a freight train. Thomas Hale. The same name he had seen at the top of the list in the file. But that wasn't the only thing that chilled him. There was something else in the man's voice: fear. A deep, gnawing fear. And that fear was infectious. Malik took a deep breath. Who is he? The man's voice was low, almost reverential. He's not just a man. He's a symbol of everything they've built. A master manipulator. He's the one who controls everything in this town, every business, every piece of land, every vote. And the worst part is, he has allies everywhere. There are people in power who answer to him. If you expose him, you'll expose them all. Malik stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. Hale was the one behind the entire operation. He wasn't just another criminal, he was the architect of an entire system of control and manipulation. And if Malik was going to expose him, he would be walking into the heart of the storm. The man stepped back, his eyes locking with Malik's. I can't help you anymore. They're already looking for you. I've done all I can. Before Malik could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Malik standing alone in the park, the weight of his next move pressing down on him. The decision. Malik took a deep breath, the words echoing in his mind. If you expose him, you'll expose them all. It was a choice he had to make. He could walk away, leave the town and never look back. Or he could dig deeper, risking everything to bring down the man who had built this dangerous empire. Malik clenched his fists, determination rising within him. He couldn't walk away now. He was already too deep. The people of this town deserved to know the truth. They deserved to be free from the control that had been thrust upon them. He had to keep going. He had to expose Hale. And so, with no time to waste, Malik began to make his final preparations. He didn't know what was ahead, but one thing was certain: this would be the hardest fight of his life. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had come this far, and he would go all the way. The truth would be uncovered. No matter the cost.